Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm continuing with an outfit for my doll Laele. We'll be making her cloak. The pattern is already up on my website and is free for personal use as usual. So because it's the best way to start any project, let's first talk about the big problem I had in making this. I had the bright idea to make the wing cells with a scrap of organza fabric, and I didn't have enough to do it the right way, so I decided I'd just cut out the individual pieces and hope for the best. As it was, these just barely fit on the fabric I had, even after I made them a bit smaller than the original design. I had intended to make the cells like an applique, so like you would when doing it the right way, I used a really wide zigzag stitch set to a 1/2 millimeter stitch length to sort of embroider around the edges and hold these pieces on. And it kind of worked, but it didn't work well. Normally when you do applique stuff like this with really shred-happy fabrics, you'd cut out a piece that's way bigger than what you need and then draw the shape you want on it, then zigzag along the lines. Afterward, you'd trim off the extra material, and this leaves fabric that's sewn down on both edges of the zigzag stitch, so it's a lot less likely to pull apart. Since I didn't have enough fabric to do something that big, I was kind of hoping I could sew down the pieces with the fabric under just one side of the zigzag, and like I said, it kind of worked. Had it been a sturdier fabric, it would have been no problem. But organza is really delicate, and I can already tell that eventually the fabric is going to pull out from under the stitches and look bad. So unless I can somehow anchor all of it with fabric glue or something, this will all someday pull off. So before you make this cloak, my advice is to instead look at other options for adding the wing cell patterns. Either do them with just embroidery marking the edges, or use fabric paint, or consider something like heat transfer vinyl, which should be plenty sturdy for something like doll clothing. Had I used something like cotton, I don't think I'd have to worry about shredding, even if the applique is done imperfectly due to how little material I had handy. But that's just something to keep in mind, and something I thought was important to discuss before the construction started. No matter what material you choose, put the wing cells on first, then we can move on to actually assembling the cloak. Once the wing cells are done, however you do them, put the outer wing and inner wing pieces together with the fabric right sides together. You can pin all the way around the edge of the wing, leaving the flat top part open. After it's pinned, start at the top, backstitch, and then sew all the way around the edge of the wing. When you get to the top edge again, backstitch again, because you'll need the seams here to be sturdy for when we turn the wings right side out. Sew both wings the same way. Turning it right side out comes next. This was where I was most nervous with my wing cells because of how delicate they were, but it went okay. Some of the pieces pulled a bit and I was a little worried they'd come undone, but they didn't. After both wings are right side out, they need to be pressed, but so does the hood, so let's make that next. I start with the lining, both pieces right sides together, and sew around the back curve, leaving the front edge and bottom edge open. The hood's outer shell goes together the same way. Unfold the hood and hood lining, and turn the lining right side out. You'll want to fit it inside the hood's outer shell so the shell and lining have the right sides of the fabric together. Then sew along the front edge to join the two pieces, backstitching at the beginning and end and leaving the bottom edge open. Now the hood can be turned right side out and it's ready to press too. I don't usually show pressing because my full-sized ironing board is kept in another room, so just use your imagination for that part and we'll move on to making the capelet. Since we'll be adding trim around the edge of the capelet, there's no need to do anything but finish edges with a zigzag stitch to prevent it from fraying. Once the capelet's edge is finished, the wings will be sewn into the curve of the neck. The pattern's made for it to fit pretty close to perfectly with the wings just up against each other in the center, but the angle at which you connect the wings affects how they lay. I want mine to part more easily in the back, but you can arrange yours to overlap or hang more toward the back if you prefer. Whatever you choose, pin the wings and capelet together along that curved neckline, making sure the fabric lays nice and smooth. Then use a zigzag stitch to connect the edge of the capelet's neck to the top of the wings. The addition of the hood will give us our final seam in a second. This is just to hold everything together. So now we'll add the hood by putting the capelet and the hood's outer shell right sides together and pinning at the middle and both ends. When I designed this cloak, it was with the intention of gathering the hood at the back of the neck so it would be full around the back of the doll's head. But this fabric is too thick to gather well, so I just sew in pleats instead. I fold it one way, pin it, check, and decide I like it better pinned with the pleats going the opposite direction. So I make that little adjustment and then it's ready to sew. Fold back the lining of the hood and sew the edge of the hood's outer shell to the neck of the capelet and wings. After the threads are trimmed up, the hood's lining can be folded to cover this seam. I do this part by hand because it lets me use a hidden stitch, but you could sew it by machine if you prefer. It's just a straight shot across the neck of the cloak. Next up is adding the trim. I decided to use synthetic fur because I want to evoke the idea of a moth with this cloak. So I pinned the fur along the edge of the capelet, overlapping the edge just a bit so the zigzagging won't show, and then stitch it on by hand. I hate sewing fur fabrics by machine because it's messy and never looks good with the stitching on top, so this is how I add fur trims most of the time. I cut my trim at an angle in the corners, so that needs a whip stitch to hold the pieces together nicely, but on the whole, connecting it is pretty simple. When I sew the trim onto the hood, I want this to wrap around the edge, so I position the trim halfway onto the edge of the hood and stitch it on by hand. Great big stitches are fine for this because it just has to hold it in place. This gives me enough fur trim that I can wrap it around the edge so the fur will frame my doll's face. After I fold the trim over, I connect its edge to the hood lining using a whip stitch. Last of all is picking a clasp and positioning it so there will be a small gap in the front of the cloak when it's closed. The wings part easily in the back when she lifts her arms, which she has to do to keep her balance in these shoes, but it hangs together nicely when her arms are down. This was kind of unusual, but really fun to make, and I think it works super nicely for her work-in-progress outfit. And that's all for today though. Thanks for watching. Bye.